Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 229 is the chapter where Sukuna finally reveals himself to be a complete and total fraud. Now don't get me wrong, in the fight with Gojo so far, I actually think that Sukuna has been winning. I mean, they've been pretty evenly matched most of the time, but overall I'd say Sukuna has had most of the small wins up until this point. However, as we're about to see, in the spoilers for chapter 229, it seems like Sukuna knows that he isn't able to win without using the power that he stole from Megumi. Just before we get into it, I want to remind you guys that at the very beginning of the series, Sukuna said to Gojo that he would kill him once he got control of Yuji's body. So that was Sukuna basically saying that, yeah, I'm strong enough to beat you, I can do it with my own technique, you know, I don't need any other powers to defeat you. Now it's seeming like that's not the case, but let's get into it. So Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 229 picks up immediately where the last chapter left off, where Gojo was having a nosebleed. Now, the reason I think he was having a nosebleed in that chapter is because he has been pushing his curse technique to the limit, because as we know, he's done 3 consecutive domain expansions, and on top of that, he used reverse curse technique to heal his burnt out curse technique. As a result, he's pushing his body to the absolute limit, and so yeah, it makes sense why he'd have some kind of negative reaction after doing all of that. Now, this new chapter begins with Yuta noticing this and kind of getting a bit worried, but Gojo himself just casually wipes the nosebleed away, and he doesn't really seem to care that much. Following that, Gojo and Sukuna then activate their domain expansions for the 4th time in a row, which is insane. And yeah, I mean, by Sukuna doing this so quickly, what it shows is that he's also using reverse curse technique to heal his burnt out curse technique. Usually when it comes to most people, after they've done 1 domain expansion, they're not able to use their curse technique for a while. But when it comes to these two, just by the way they can use reverse curse technique, they're able to just go back to back to back to back to back. From the sidelines, Kusakabe watches on as he just gives his commentary, and one of the things he says is that if Gojo wants to win, he has to deal so much damage to Sukuna that the King of Curses won't be able to maintain his domain expansion. One thing I should point out about that is in the last chapter, when Gojo and Sukuna were kind of fighting each other, that is exactly what Gojo did. He dealt so much damage to Sukuna that Sukuna's domain collapsed. But the only problem in the last chapter was that as Gojo did this, Sukuna at the same time destroyed his domain from the outside. So it was kind of like a stalemate. Like Gojo did win, but at the same time Sukuna won, so nothing really happened. We then see that inside the domain in this chapter, Gojo is just going full goblin mode at this point, and he just punches Sukuna over and over and over again, and there is this one moment where it seems like Sukuna is able to dodge it, but then Gojo just throws him straight into the malevolent shrine. Gojo then uses his curse technique to literally pull Sukuna towards him again, and as he goes to land a punch, this time Sukuna does block it with his 2 hands. 1 second later, both of their domain expansions then collapse again at the same time, and from this we are actually able to learn something pretty important. What we know now is that inside the domain, like just inside, Gojo is stronger than Sukuna, period. Like, Malevolent Shrine is not as powerful as Unlimited Void. We know that now, because when it comes to the clashes inside the domain, Gojo has now won 2 times in a row. Anyway, following the collapse of their domains, Gojo and Sukuna then once again go to open domain expansion, but everyone notices that Gojo's domain was expanded a tiny bit earlier. Now, you might be wondering why exactly this is, and the reason is pretty simple. Earlier in the chapter, when Gojo was just punching up Sukuna inside the domain, basically what happened was Sukuna got injured, he got hurt, and so Sukuna just took a little tiny microsecond to just heal himself quickly with reverse curse technique. The problem though is that by Sukuna using that brief amount of time to heal himself, Gojo spent that microsecond healing his burnt out curse technique. This means that when it came time to expand their domains, Gojo had a slight 0.01 second advantage, and that slight delay, combined with the fact that Gojo's domain is better on the inside, it meant that Sukuna had miscalculated. As a direct consequence of that, Malevolent Shrine doesn't last for very long. I think it lasts for about 3 minutes this time around, and it collapses on the inside of Gojo's domain expansion. Now, this is amazing because basically what it means is that Sukuna is now unprotected. He's just a man inside of Gojo's domain. And that means that, without the protection of his own domain to fight against Gojo's, Sukuna finally gets hit with the effect of Unlimited Void. In case you might have forgotten, Unlimited Void basically just sends, it's kind of in the name, it sends almost an unlimited amount of information into a person's brain. And for most people, the information overload is just way too much, and it leaves them paralyzed. In one of the panels for chapter 229, we can see that Sukuna is completely paralyzed, like he's just staring forward with a blank expression, basically in the same way that Jogo was way back in season 1. And in this moment, Gojo rushes towards him with basically the intention of killing him, and he thinks to himself that he's going to crush Sukuna's heart, lungs, and liver. I mean, to be fair, Sukuna can survive without certain organs. I mean, we know that because he ripped out Yuji's heart, and then he was just walking around like nothing happened. So Sukuna doesn't need these organs to survive, but if Gojo was to do this and was to crush his heart, lungs, and liver, it's going to put Sukuna in a position where he has to use reverse curse technique. And again, if Sukuna uses reverse curse technique to heal himself, that just gives Gojo the advantage, because when Sukuna is healing himself, Gojo can do all sorts of things. He can activate his domain again, he can do whatever he wants. However, just when things are looking good for Gojo, Sukuna wakes up and he summons Mahoraga. Now, this is crazy. I mean, we've seen Sukuna use Mahoraga before in his fight against Yorozu, but this image right here, I mean, I can't show it on screen, but this imagery of Gojo just standing there and Mahoraga towering over him, like, it's terrifying. Like, Gojo does look like an insect compared to this just massive creature. Now, there's a couple things we need to mention here. The first is that the reason Sukuna was able to wake up so quickly, and the reason why Mahoraga is already adapted to Unlimited Void, is because in the last chapter, Sukuna was already laying the groundwork for this to happen. Like we've seen before, the wheel on Mahoraga's head is basically the key to everything, because whenever it makes a single turn, it adapts to whatever was happening before. And so in the last chapter, when Gojo had his Unlimited Void open and was attacking Sukuna, Sukuna was secretly using the wheel to adapt. To be honest, we actually don't know how long Sukuna was doing this. I mean, in theory, Sukuna could have been using the wheel from the beginning of the fight and we just never knew. Because as we saw in the last chapter, the wheel was hidden in the shadows, so no one knew what was going on. Nobody knew that he was adapting. If Sukuna has been using this from the very beginning, by now he's adapted to Hollow Purple, he's adapted to Curse Technique Reversal Red, he's adapted to Unlimited Void, he's adapted to all of Gojo's moves. And so when Mahoraga comes out now, he knows everything Gojo can do. Like, Sukuna has been letting Gojo do all of these different things and letting Mahoraga adapt to it, so that when he finally comes out in this chapter, there's nothing Gojo can do. According to the leaks, Gojo is surprised when Mahoraga suddenly comes out, but he quickly gets ready to destroy Mahoraga in a single hit before it has the chance to get used to Unlimited Void. Gojo tries to use Curse Technique Reversal, but Mahoraga destroys Gojo's domain from the inside. The chapter then ends in that moment with his domain being just wiped out. There's so much to say about this, but I guess the first thing is that if Sukuna feels like he can't win this fight without using the strongest Shikigami from a curse technique that doesn't even belong to him, it just raises so many questions, because this guy, he's meant to be the best sorcerer of all time. And yet, by Sukuna bringing out Mahoraga, you know, whether he wants to admit it or not, that's kind of him admitting that he's not good enough to beat Gojo by himself. 10 Shadows is not his technique. It belongs to someone else. So when he was talking all that smack at the beginning of the series about how he was going to beat Gojo when he gets control of Yuji's body, it has me thinking now, if he had gotten control of Yuji's body fully, would he have beat Gojo? Because if he had control of Yuji, he would not have had Mahoraga. He wouldn't have had the 10 Shadows. It would have just been Malevolent Shrine. And in that scenario, it looks like he would have lost, because he wouldn't have been able to adapt to a Limited Void. So I think the fact that Mahoraga needs to come out at this point, to me, it proves beyond any doubt now that Gojo would have won this battle if it was fair and square. However, as we know, it's not fair and square. Sukuna does have the 10 Shadows now, so he is well within his rights to unleash Mahoraga. But I'm just saying, by doing this, it just shows point blank he wouldn't have won if he didn't steal the 10 Shadows from Megumi. Now, putting that to the side for a second, what are Gojo's chances here? Now that Mahoraga is out, does Gojo have a chance of survival? The answer to that depends on how long Sukuna has been using the wheel. If he's been using the wheel from the beginning of the fight and he's adapted to, you know, Hollow Purple, Curse Technique Reversal Red, if Mahoraga has already been adapted to all of those different things, then the only way Gojo can win is if he awakens something that's never been done before. Within the Gojo family, we know that basically all of the moves we've seen from Gojo have been done by someone else before. I think he even mentioned in his fight against Toji that Hollow Purple has been used by a couple other people in the past, so he didn't invent that move. But in this situation, he genuinely might have to invent something that's never been done before, because if Mahoraga is adapted to all his different moves, he has no other choice. He either has to invent something new or he's gonna die. It's as simple as that. Because his Shikigami is just way too strong. There's just no other way. On the other side though, if Mahoraga's wheel was really used for the first time in the last chapter, like if that genuinely was the first time that Sukuna had been secretly using it, then all it means is that Mahoraga has adapted to Gojo's domain, and maybe to certain physical attacks. But beyond that, you know, Gojo can still use red, he can still use hollow purple, and he can still win. But my suspicion is that Sukuna has been secretly using it from the very beginning, which would mean that, yeah, at this point, Gojo has very limited options. I mean, like I said, he has to make something up. There's nothing left at this point. If Sukuna wins, I'm sure some people will say that, oh yeah, Sukuna is the better sorcerer. But if you just flip the script for a second, if Gojo went into this fight with his technique plus 10 shadows against Sukuna, and Gojo won doing that, everyone would call him a fraud. So I'm sorry, I have to say, in this situation, Sukuna is the fraud. He is the fraud for using someone else's technique to win a fight that should have been an even match. But that is just my opinion on it. I respect Sukuna. He's obviously amazing, but man, this just leaves a sour taste in the mouth. But it is really cool to look at, so I guess there's that. Anyway, people, you should know that next week there is not going to be a new chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen. I think the manga is taking a break for at least 1 week, but in 2 weeks' time we should be back, so I'll see you then. Until the next one, peace out.